the ancient Indian texts talk a lot about Vimanas. Vimana is a flying machine.
Vimana. This is Ravana's Pushpaka. This was a golden palace-sized aircraft. They are described as these extraordinary flying palaces or chariots with these magical features. So,
ancient Sanskrit describes flying machines in technical detail so specific that scholars have spent a century arguing about whether the specifications could work. Then Grok AI examined the same texts and produced findings that made ignoring them structurally difficult. The real question isn't whether AI discovered something new. It's what those manuscripts actually contain, and why the controversy has refused to die for over 100 years. Stay tuned to find out. But before we get to what Grok AI found, we need to understand exactly what these ancient Sanskrit texts actually say about Vimanas, and how the story evolved from poetic mythology into something far more controversial. The earliest references appear in the Rig Veda, one of the world's oldest religious texts, written around 1500 to 1200 BCE. The Rig Veda includes descriptions of flying vehicles called Vimanas, used by the gods to journey across the sky. These accounts are poetic and deeply symbolic, and mainstream scholars have consistently viewed them as mythical portrayals of divine beings naturally moving through the heavens, using flight as a symbol of divine strength and freedom. This explanation fits Rig Veda's most poetic verses, yet the Sanskrit writings about Vimanas do not end there. The Ramayana, one of the two great Sanskrit epics, describes the Pushpaka Vimana in much greater detail. This is the flying vehicle first used by the villain Ravana and later by the hero Rama. The Pushpaka is portrayed as carrying many passengers, traveling freely in every direction, moving without animal or human force, and adjusting its speed and height whenever needed. Its interior is explained with remarkable architectural detail: rooms, seating layouts, and beautiful gardens. The Mahabharata, the other great Sanskrit epic, also includes several references to flying vehicles used during battles, Vimanas carrying weapons, moving at incredible speed, and fighting in the sky. Some passages even describe attacks from airborne craft that sound surprisingly similar to aerial bombardment. Yet the text that Grok AI devoted the greatest amount of analytical attention to was not either of these famous epics. Instead, it focused on a far less familiar Sanskrit manuscript known as the Vimanica Shastra. The Vimanica Shastra and what it really describes. The Vimanica Shastra is a Sanskrit manuscript reportedly transcribed during the early 20th century by an Indian scholar named Pandit Subbaraya Shastri, who claimed he received it through psychic channeling from an ancient sage. The manuscript, produced between 1904 and 1923, explains in technical detail the design, operation, and navigation of Vimanas. This unusual origin is exactly why mainstream scholars dismiss the text altogether. A manuscript created through claimed psychic revelation in the early 1900s cannot be considered archaeological proof of ancient technology. However, what makes the Vimanica Shastra genuinely fascinating to serious researchers is that its technical descriptions show no connection to any aircraft technology available or under development when Shastri was writing. The manuscript presents concepts, unique propulsion methods, materials with unusual characteristics, and navigation based on the sun and stars that Shastri, a Sanskrit scholar without engineering training, had no obvious means of inventing from contemporary knowledge. In 1974, a team of aeronautical engineers and scientists at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore carried out a formal technical study of the Vimanica Shastra's aircraft designs. Their conclusion was that the designs, exactly as described, could not fly using conventional aerodynamic principles. That report is frequently presented as the final debunking. Yet researchers who examined the complete report noticed an important detail often missing from the brief dismissal. The study concluded the designs were aerodynamically impossible, but it also stated that the specific construction materials described in the manuscript possessed properties the engineers could neither identify nor compare with any known substance. Unknown materials explained in technical detail within a manuscript whose author insisted they were not products of his own imagination. Grok AI's study of the Vimanica Shastra focused closely on this question of materials, comparing the Sanskrit names and property descriptions of the 17 unique materials mentioned in the text with every known material and material combination found in modern materials science databases. None of them matched anything already recorded. Subscribe now, because what Grok AI uncovered when it compared the Vimanica Shastra's operational descriptions with the physics behind non-conventional propulsion systems is where the story becomes genuinely difficult to dismiss. The man who dedicated his life to this, before exploring what Grok AI discovered, it helps to understand the one respected mainstream scholar who spent decades insisting the Vimana texts deserved serious study. Dr. V. Raghavan was a Sanskrit scholar at the University of Madras, not a fringe investigator, not a pseudo-scientist, but a highly respected academic who received India's highest civilian honor, the Padma Bhushan, for his remarkable contributions to Sanskrit scholarship. In 1974, during the Indian National Science Academy Symposium on Ancient Indian Science, Dr. Raghavan presented a paper arguing that the Vimana descriptions found in ancient Sanskrit texts were far too detailed and technically precise to be dismissed as simple mythology. He proposed that some form of advanced aerial technology might once have existed in ancient India, and that these texts preserved genuine knowledge passed through generations, gradually becoming woven into religious and mythological storytelling over time. His presentation immediately sparked debate. Mainstream archaeologists and historians highlighted the lack of physical evidence. No wreckage, no manufacturing facilities, and no historical records from neighboring civilizations describing Indian flying machines. Dr. Raghavan answered this criticism directly. He pointed out that the materials described in the Vimana texts included substances unlikely to survive in the archaeological record the way metals or stone normally would. If those materials were organic composites or compounds that decomposed quickly, physical evidence would not reasonably be expected to remain after thousands of years. The lack of physical evidence, he argued, should not automatically be treated as evidence that nothing ever existed. He passed away in 1979 without achieving scholarly agreement on his ideas. Following his death, mainstream Sanskrit scholarship largely moved away from his work. Grok AI later rediscovered his research while conducting its wider review of scholarly studies on Vimana texts and highlighted his specific arguments about construction materials as deserving the kind of computational cross-referencing that simply did not exist when he presented them in 1974. What Grok discovered in the technical language. When Grok AI examined the technical passages within the Vimanica Shastra and the more detailed Vimana descriptions found in the Mahabharata, it used the same method applied to any technical document, treating the language as descriptive instead of symbolic, while extracting the operational and engineering details embedded throughout the text. Several observations stood out. First came the propulsion descriptions. The Vimanica Shastra explains a propulsion system that involves no combustion, uses no fuel that burns, and functions through interactions between specific atmospheric layers and particular materials built into the craft's structure. This description does not resemble any propulsion technology available when the manuscript was written, or, for that matter, any propulsion system operating today. It does, however, show striking structural similarities to theoretical ideas explored within several non-conventional propulsion concepts studied by physicists in recent decades, including electro-hydrodynamic propulsion and certain theoretical interpretations involving zero-point energy interactions. The AI carefully pointed out that a structural similarity between an ancient description and a modern theoretical idea is not proof that the ancient text accurately describes that concept. It could simply be coincidence. It could also result from language broad enough that several different ideas appear to fit. What the AI considered genuinely noteworthy was the precision of the Sanskrit terminology. The manuscript uses distinct technical terms for components, materials, and operating methods, suggesting the author was describing specific, separate elements rather than offering vague poetic references to flight. Second, the navigation descriptions. The Vimana texts explain navigation through what roughly translates as sensitivity to particular cosmic energies or atmospheric electrical conditions. Grok AI identified this description as potentially consistent with navigation based on Earth's magnetic field, a concept considered completely unknown in ancient India according to standard historical understanding, yet described with enough precision for the AI to highlight it as worthy of attention. Third, the operational limitations. Researchers considered this the most fascinating finding. Unlike many ancient descriptions of divine vehicles, which can travel anywhere and accomplish anything without restriction, the Vimanica Shastra clearly outlines operational limits, conditions where the craft cannot function, altitude restrictions, and seasonal changes affecting performance. These limitations closely resemble what you would expect from an engineering document describing a real machine with practical constraints, rather than from a religious text portraying a god's magical flying vehicle. The question archaeology cannot fully answer. The most common objection to any theory involving advanced ancient technology is straightforward. Where is the physical evidence? Where are the engines, manufacturing tools, or metal components that should have survived thousands of years within the archaeological record? This objection carries considerable weight for most claims involving ancient technology. However, regarding the Vimana question specifically, Grok AI's analysis identified one reason why this argument may not be as conclusive as it first appears. The materials listed in the Vimanica Shastra for constructing Vimanas are almost entirely organic or composite. Plant-based resins, carefully selected minerals in unusual combinations, and lightweight materials described as responding to atmospheric conditions. Except for one or two examples, none of these specified construction materials would likely survive in the archaeological record for thousands of years under ordinary preservation conditions. This does not prove Vimanas actually existed. It simply means the absence of physical evidence is exactly what you would expect, whether the manuscript describes genuine technology or imagined mythology, making the archaeological silence genuinely uncertain rather than clearly negative. What Grok AI ultimately concluded, while carefully acknowledging uncertainty throughout its analysis, was that the Vimana texts contain an unusually high level of internally consistent technical detail regarding materials, operational parameters, and navigation systems compared with texts that mainstream scholarship generally classifies as purely religious mythology. This internal consistency does not prove the texts describe real technology, but it represents a recurring pattern that the AI's analysis could not completely explain through conventional interpretations. The question nobody wants to ask. This is where the story ultimately leads, and why Grok AI's analysis matters beyond the single question of whether ancient Indian flying machines truly existed. If even a small portion of what the Vimana texts describe reflects genuine technological knowledge once present in ancient India, then we must explain where that knowledge originated and why it vanished so completely that no physical remains, no continuation into later Indian technology, and no similar development in other contemporary civilizations provides any clear evidence of it. Ancient Indian civilization was highly advanced. The mathematical achievements preserved in Sanskrit texts include ideas such as the value of pi, early forms of algebra, and astronomical calculations with remarkable precision. The philosophical depth and grammatical sophistication of Sanskrit literature are widely recognized. In principle, it is not impossible that this civilization developed technological knowledge in certain fields that simply failed to survive within the physical archaeological record. What Grok AI cannot determine, and what no AI examining ancient texts can determine, is whether the technical precision it identified in the Vimana manuscripts reflects authentic ancient knowledge, extraordinary ancient imagination, or something somewhere between the two. The texts contain something that resembles engineering thinking. Whether that engineering mindset describes real machines or carefully imagined fictional ones is a question the manuscripts themselves cannot answer. Subscribe, because the ongoing digitization of Sanskrit manuscript collections across India continues making previously inaccessible texts available for exactly the kind of computational analysis Grok AI carried out here. Several of the most technically detailed Vimana manuscripts still remain in Indian university libraries, examined by Sanskrit scholars but never subjected to the kind of cross-disciplinary technical analysis represented by this research. As those manuscripts become available for comprehensive AI study, the picture of what ancient Indian knowledge truly contained, and whether any of it describes things that should never have existed, will become much clearer. We will be here when that happens. The Mercury vortex engine. Among the many technical descriptions found in the Vimanica Shastra, one has drawn more attention from engineers and physicists than almost any other: the description of what the manuscript calls the Mercury vortex engine. The Vimanica Shastra describes a propulsion system involving heated mercury spinning in a precise circular motion inside a container, generating a force that the text claims creates upward thrust. The description includes detailed operating instructions covering the direction of rotation, the required temperature, and the exact geometric shape of the container. The reason this description attracts serious attention is because it does not resemble mythology. Gods do not require Mercury vortex engines. Divine beings in religious texts fly because they possess divine powers. They do not depend on technical propulsion systems described with such detailed operational instructions. The precision of the Mercury vortex description is exactly the kind of information you would expect to find inside an engineering manual rather than a religious story about supernatural beings. When Grok AI examined this particular passage using modern physics, it identified something genuinely worth noting. Mercury spinning under certain conditions can produce measurable electromagnetic effects. This phenomenon has been documented through modern physics experiments and is not considered controversial. However, the manuscripts claim that spinning mercury creates enough upward thrust to lift a vehicle has never been demonstrated and may conflict with our current understanding of known physics. However, identifying spinning mercury as something unusual, something possessing unique electromagnetic properties worth using within a propulsion system, reflects a genuine observation about material behavior that is neither obvious nor well understood in the science of the early 20th century. The real question is not whether a Mercury vortex engine could actually achieve flight. The real question is how an ancient manuscript came to recognize Mercury's electromagnetic behavior as the foundation for a propulsion concept. That knowledge must have originated somewhere. The descriptions that extend beyond Earth. Perhaps the most remarkable passages within the Mahabharata's Vimana descriptions are those describing journeys beyond Earth's atmosphere. The epic contains accounts of Vimanas traveling to other worlds, not simply as symbolic journeys into divine realms, but through descriptions mentioning the absence of air, changing conditions at extreme altitudes, and the appearance of Earth when viewed from vast distances. Mainstream Sanskrit scholars interpret these passages as accounts of divine celestial travel, mythical journeys between cosmological realms without physical meaning. For much of the epic's cosmological content, this remains a reasonable interpretation. However, Grok AI highlights several specific passages where the language shifts from clearly mythological to surprisingly observational. These include descriptions of the sky gradually changing color as altitude increases, references to the difficulty of breathing at great heights, and one passage describing Earth as appearing round and clearly bounded when viewed from far above. Earth does appear round when seen from sufficient altitude. That is an accurate observational fact. The idea of a spherical Earth was known to certain ancient Greek philosophers, but it was not universally accepted and did not appear in Indian astronomical texts from the same period with the same level of detail found in Greek sources. So how does a mythological account of divine celestial travel include the specific and accurate observation that Earth appears round and bounded when viewed from a great enough distance? Grok AI identified this passage as the single most unusual finding in its entire analysis of the Vimana texts, an accurate observational detail embedded inside a mythological narrative where, if the story were entirely fictional, it seemingly should not appear. Subscribe. The digitization and computational study of ancient manuscripts is advancing rapidly across the world. Whatever additional anomalies emerge as more ancient texts become available for the same systematic analysis, Grok AI applied to the Sanskrit Vimana manuscripts is a question likely to be answered over the coming years, whether mainstream scholarship chooses to engage with those findings or not. We will be here as every new answer unfolds.